Here at PACE, and I will be your moderator for this webinar. Welcome. Just so you know, we at PACE here are doing webinars because we launched a business incubator program, and we want to support our small business people. So we're offering some webinars, and this is just one of them, but we have had some in the past, and we will have more in the future. There will be a Q&A after Jocelyn presents, but if you want, you can leave your questions in the chat, and we will bring those forward at that time. This session, just so you know, will be recorded, and it will be made available on the PACE website with a link to the PACE YouTube channel. So please keep your mics muted and your camera off, and we will be sending out a survey following this session. I would like to introduce Jocelyn Bullock of C.H.R.L Consulting. Jocelyn is a certified human resources specialist with many years of experience. Jocelyn has recently retired and has established a human resources consulting business. She also has a position as an instructor working virtually with Confederation College out of Thunder Bay, and delivers the human resources program for that college. You can personally contact Jocelyn Consulting Service after this webinar. So with no further delays, take it away, Jocelyn.
Thank you so much, Sandra, for that introduction. So I just want to add a little bit about what brings me to where I'm at today. So that's in addition to the bio that Sandra just gave you. This is a little bit more information about me. But in addition to this, why I'm here today with you is because as a practitioner, I worked in the public sector, of course. But even as a practitioner with a department available to the organization, I often found that what was lacking was resources that were local. So if I was seeking external resources, I was going outside of our region at great expense at times. So what I wanted to do was offer services, take the information that I have learned over the years, and learn more about small businesses, what you encounter, and try to offer some support to your businesses. So that's what we're here for today. So thank you for taking your time to be with us today. So as today's outline, I would really like to know who we have online with us today. So I do have 2 interactive slides that I'll walk you through how we're going to use those. We're going to look at what HR is, why I think it's important, why it's important to a business. And in that context, I want to look at it as the life cycle of an employee and the considerations that you can look at each stage of their employment. We'll talk a little bit about the current economic and psychological realities that are impacting employment and some effective human resources practices. And then at the end, time allowing, of course, the Q&A session. So as Sandra said, put your questions in the chat as we go or speak up. I'll do my best to address anything as we go. And then hopefully we have time for a bit of a moderated roundtable discussion at the end. I've created 2 questions to kind of facilitate some further discussion. So I'm going to pop a QR code up on the screen. If you scan that QR code with your camera on your phone, it will take you to the link. And as I can see, I'm waiting for players to join. It will ask you for your name, so just pop your name in. And once I see that we have individuals joined, maybe Sandra, if you can help me with numbers, because I can't see the total number on my screen of people that are in. So once I hit start the quiz, you'll see the question pop up, and it'll give you 5 seconds before the quiz actually starts, and then I've got 45 seconds. So we're going to start the quiz because how are we doing?
19 people.
Okay. Okay, so we've got 14, 13. It's going the wrong way. Okay, so I'm gonna start the quiz and it should count down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Just asking what community or area you are from. And it will give you now 45 seconds and it should be populating the results as you answer. Or should be. Okay, there are our results. So 7 from Dryden and area, 2 from Sulacote, and 6 from other. So maybe just in the chat, let us know what other is to inform myself for future breakdowns. All right, so we're going to move to question 2. What is your business type? And these are, I just selected these randomly to try and guess what kind of businesses might be joining. So I'm really interested to know what your business type is. And again, if you've answered other, please let us know in the chat and then I can have an idea of how to break it down better in the future. Other, I really need to do some work on that. So if you can give us some ideas in the chat of what other is, then that would be super helpful. All right, thanks. I'm just gonna stop the QR code before I go to the next slide. All right, so I wanted to start a little bit with talking about the reputation of HR because this is kind of the elephant in the room as far as I'm concerned. There are some typical beliefs that pertain to HR practices, and it can be viewed as being overly bureaucratic, just all about getting those forms completed, compliance training. HR is all about the employer and not about the employee. And what we found is that employees tend to encounter human resources and especially human resources departments in times of difficulties with their jobs. Therefore, that's their only experience. And that somewhat obviously colors their perspective of human resources. So what I believe and what my reality is that a good HR practitioner will always believe in the parallel of service to both employers and employees. And that should be the goal of any business or any organization's HR practices. A good practitioner will be obviously legislatively compliant. And what that means to me is it's not based in who is right or who is wrong, but what is right and what is wrong, because there are a lot of guiding factors in HR, legislatively especially, that inform that. And so I guess theoretically, what my philosophy is that HR is not only a practice and it's certainly not necessarily a department, but it's a thought process that can be applied by any business owner and as a benefit to their organization through excellent practices and focusing on their employees as a resource and an investment. So why should you as an organization or a business or anyone care about human resources? Organizations typically spend anywhere from 18 to 52% or more of their budget on salaries, effectively your human resources. That number that I've quoted, 18 to 52%, I know that's a big spread, but it's actually even more. This is a low average. If you were looking at larger organizations, you're probably anywhere from 40 to 70% of budget. So it's a huge chunk of your expenditure, and a good set of human resources practices throughout the life cycle of your business and your employees will ensure that you as a business owner are avoiding additional legal costs, um, not only legal costs, but salary costs, maximizing the benefit that employees can bring to your own business, and creating also a customer base through ambassadorship for your business. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Sorry, slides aren't responding. All right, so let's look at the life cycle of an employee. And this is certainly not broken down in any scientific means, but of importance to your business. But these are the three areas that I want to talk about today. So you have someone who appears to you as an applicant, potentially becomes an employee, and after that is a past employee, and therefore, hopefully, an ambassador to your organization. They've had a good experience, there's been a trust level established, and they are now going to potentially drive business to your organization. Before we get into those life cycle aspects, I also wanted to acknowledge, some of the key considerations that your business has to operate within. So right now, currently, recession, yes or no? Is there one? Isn't there one? Whatever the reality of the economy is that you're operating in is a factor that's impacting your business. You also have your labor or your employee market. Sometimes it's an employer's market, sometimes it's an employee's market. The comparison being, buyers and sellers market in real estate. The reality is that as an organization, you're going to have to respond to whatever the reality is of that labor market. I also want to talk about the intergenerational workforce and the impact that can have in your business. And just to acknowledge the legislative constraints that exist. So employment standards, tax laws, human rights, trade union legislation, if that applies to your organization. The reality is these are all, they're changing, they're morphing, they're impacting your business. You need to be aware of them. There's a lot. My favorite saying is we're all, at some point, either employees or employers, but that doesn't make us an expert in what's happening in case law or legislative changes. That's my job. That's what I'm here to do for organizations. And it's when I go out into a community and I participate in businesses as a customer, it's a strange reality that I exist in because I look at everything from an HR perspective. I'm wondering how things are scheduled, how they're paid, et cetera, et cetera. It's just the lens through which I tend to see the world because I've functioned in this area all of my life. So the reality of the recession, we have to acknowledge that this is a fact. I've just given you a brief definition of what a recession actually is defined as, but what does a business need to do when they're facing these kinds of economic times? Stay hopeful, but be prepared for the worst. Maybe you're going to be avoiding major expenditures and trying to minimize your costs. You want to be maximizing your revenue and getting creative to do so. But one of the things that I fully believe is now is a time to view your employees as assets and investments for your business. And I also wanted to talk about the labor shortage. The myth that I hear and that kind of grates on my nerves a bit is nobody wants to work anymore. The pandemic created too much reliance on CERB. The reality is the workforce has changed substantially, and that employers always need to respond to the labor market that they find themselves functioning in. So where have all the workers gone? These are some of the realities, and I'm not going to say the pandemic didn't have any effect. It certainly did. A lot of people have retired. The boomers have reached that retirement age, and the pandemic may have accelerated some of that, but in some cases it actually decelerated some of it because some people decided not to retire during that time because they couldn't go anywhere. Um, the impact on the service sector during the pandemic really forced a lot of women out of the workforce. And some families, adapted to one income and changed their perspective of the importance of working as opposed to being available to families. Younger workers that are coming up, more selective about the jobs that they're going to take. And we'll talk a bit about the different generations and how um, the realities that they grow up in impact their view of work. The aging population, declining birth rates, those are two factors that are definitely having an impact. And really, honestly, this is a trend that we could have forecasted years ago. And by years ago, I mean, post World War II. But we didn't really do much to prepare for it. So here we are. So while it is not solely the result of the pandemic, that experience certainly has impacted our workforce. So why does an intergenerational workforce matter? As I said, generations are defined by the economy they were born into and came of age in. Not only the economy, but the major events, the state of technology, all of these are major factors that impact how those individuals look at themselves as an employee, or even just forms their character. If you're not paying attention to the different generational perspectives that are interacting in your workforce, you are going to risk turnover, issues like ageism, unmet needs of a certain generation, more conflict occurring due to varying attitudes, values, and beliefs. And even if these conversations, you open up these conversations to your workforce, you'll find that it's very interesting. Now, I did want to do a bit of a breakdown on the different generations. I'm not an expert, certainly not, but I wanted to give you a little bit of perspective on the different generations. And I want to note, different sources use different years to define these generations. It's a little bit odd, but the reality is that geography plays a factor. Where you're speaking, so Canada might define them differently than New Zealand, etc. So my terms are all approximately. So Gen Z, approximately 2001 to 2020. As you can see, they come out as an optimistic yet risk-averse group. So these individuals have always had immediate access to technology, and they have a tendency towards social responsibility and diversity, as well as that modern technology. So this is almost, your immediate gratification type of generation. Your millennials are 81 to 2000, collaborative, impact oriented. They came into adulthood and the workforce at the turn of the new millennium, and they led older generations into learning technology. So they prefer that collaboration, that meaningful work and feedback. And these realities all have and can have an impact in your business. And it would be a much longer workshop to get into what can I do in my business to accommodate these differences. So I just touching on what they are today. Gen X, 65 to 1980, typically children of two working parents, well educated because they came of age in a time where you were facing the decline of manufacturing jobs when they were preparing to enter the workforce. So they were the ones that were definitely off to that post-secondary as an option. These individuals grew up with technology, so all of these factors have made them pretty independent and well educated. They value leadership. They look for that work-life balance, or flexibility, I guess you can say, as well as on-the-job learning. Our baby boomers, 1946 to 1964, these individuals entered a very competitive workforce and therefore became really dedicated workers. They value visibility. They've had to learn technology as it developed. They've had to adapt. So they're the ones that prefer that visibility in the workforce and that face-to-face interaction. And I also want to talk about what they call the traditionalists, or our silent generation, approximately 1925 to 1945. And their silent behavior has been attributed to the difficult times in which they were born. The years of this generation span from the Great Depression to the end of World War II. So they're very much known for their traditionalist behavior and a desire to just work within the system rather than change it. So that's just a brief overview of our intergenerational workforce and some considerations for you. So we've taken a little bit of a look at the labor, the employee market, and we have a little bit of knowledge about applying that to our business. Let's go back to the life cycle of an employee. So here are the three different areas, again, just laid out a little bit differently. So as an applicant, they're pre-employment, seeking work. These might come from past customers, friends, families, acquaintances, or the labor market in general. At this point, they might become an interviewee, so someone that you're interviewing. As an employee, some of the considerations that you need to take into account are how you're going to onboard this individual, orientation, training, what's their pay going to look like, how are you going to provide corrections and development throughout their work experience within your organization. And then after the fact, how do you build them into an ambassador for your business? So let's talk about the applicant stage. This is where you as an employer first encounter potential employees. So you determine that you need an employee and you begin your recruitment and selection process. You need to start by defining who is my targeted employee. Is this a full-time job? Is it a part-time job? What kind of level of responsibility is there going to be? Is it entry level, management level? Do I want to give them some supervision responsibilities? Along with that, you need to set the rate of pay. And that's going to be determined both by your ability to pay as well as the competitive labor market. All of these factors are going to determine who you are seeking or what you are seeking and what your recruitment methods should be in order to target the right demographic. So when setting pay rates, you need to consider a lot of different factors. Obviously, you have your legislative compliance, so employment standards for most, Canada Labor Code for federally regulated employers. You need to look at the labor market, your competitors, as well as your own geography. What are your industry or sector norms? If you're in a sector that has some unique challenges, then there may be some unique pay structures that exist, and you best know that from within. What are your recruiting options? And this is important, especially in our region. We operate very differently, whereas the ones that I've included on the bottom, your Indeed, Monster, ZipRecruiter, LinkedIn, those are probably more suited to larger organizations that seek out that larger job market. For our small businesses, we're looking more locally. And I haven't given a complete list of every organization that exists, and I'm not plugging one or the other. I'm just saying, know your community and know where people are going to look for jobs. These are just some examples. CKDR.net is very big. If you look at it, I'm not sure on any given day right now, it's huge. The full-time jobs are like 150 or something. So you know your labor market is competitive. Kenora Online, Leap, you have local employment agencies that can help you. If you're using social media, you need to know what that demographic is. Facebook is an older demographic, while Instagram, for example, is going to target a much younger demographic. So those are all important considerations when you're going to market to hire. Some best practices to apply to recruiting. Establish a process through which you are going to accept applications. Now, when I say this, I mean solicited and unsolicited, and be clear about that practice. And what I mean by solicited and unsolicited is that you are still going to have the walk-ins. You're still going to have people that bring a resume into your business, even if you aren't advertising. That is what I mean by unsolicited. Set a period of time how long you're going to retain those applications, and that can certainly be at your discretion, but ensure that you establish it and follow it. And it's something that, especially for unsolicited applications, you can let people know when they bring it to you. Thanks, I'll keep this on file for about 3 months, but after that, if you see that we're recruiting, or if you haven't had any contact and you're still seeking employment, come back and see me again. You can reactivate that original one if that contact happens, but it's just really good practice and will be helpful for you if you do end up going to a stack of unsolicited resumes, to know that they're current. If you're only going to contact those who will be considered, state that in your advertising so that it's very clear. That way you're not getting backlash about, well, I applied and I didn't hear anything. If you say it in your ad, it's understood. And very, very important that you follow up with someone if you do, in fact, interview them, whether they're successful or not. Obviously, if they're successful, you're following up with them. But if they're not successful, again, that contact is so critical. Not the easiest calls to make, but I find that when you're very forthright and frank in that conversation, it's kind of, I'm sorry you weren't successful. We found another applicant, kind of feel free to apply in the future or not. That's your conversation to have, but that contact is critically important. So screening employees, I wanted to talk about a little bit too, and I am looking at the time, but let's pretend we got to be selective about screening, and I should say applicants. How do we weed through those applications and make the best decisions? Proper screening as well as interview processes can be helpful and critical in case of a legal challenge of any kind. So I've just given you a bit of an applicant screening tool. This is very, very basic, but essentially you are going to populate the columns where I have education, experience, availability, and additional skills. Those are going to be something that you take out of your actual job ad. So if you said, I'm looking for a student, you basically are creating check marks, and you can also use this as a weighted tool, meaning you can assign different levels of importance based on how many points you give each area. But the benefit to this is really, it's a lot easier, especially if you're a visual learner, to make selections for interviewing. It can help remove biases. It's helpful also in the case of challenges from applicants who feel that they have been somehow wronged. If you have this documentation on file to present, it's going to help you. Some interviewing best practices. I highly recommend that you're using pre-formatted, standardized questions with room to make notes as you are interviewing. Can these change from set to set of interviews? Absolutely. But if you are interviewing for a position, highly recommend that you use the same questions with each individual. That again helps remove that bias. Establish a rating system for each question. It can be very simple, 1 through 4. from unsatisfactory to excellent, and actually score and rate each question to give yourself an overall score for that individual. Again, it just helps you make those selection decisions easily and gives a demonstration of that bias-free process in case of any challenges. Recommended length of time to keep competition files is what I would call them, is a 1 year period. Longer if you anticipate that there might be challenges, and I would say you will know if a process didn't go well, or you feel that there's an applicant who might be pushing back, maybe keep that file for a little bit longer, but a year is typically long enough. So now that you've hired someone, what's next? You are now at the process that we know in HR practices as onboarding, engaging that new employee, giving them information and giving them training that is relevant to your business. My question is, do you have an employee handbook? You certainly should. Also, a probationary period is a really good idea, both for you and the employee. And what that gives is just a defined period of time where open dialogue can and should occur between the business owner or the supervisor within the business and the employee. And it gives you a nice predetermined set of factors to discuss. So it's a format for the conversation. Doesn't have to be complicated in any way, shape, or form. And again, it's going to give you that documentation to rely upon in the future if needed. So also wanted to talk a little bit about pay and to turn your mind to what compromises pay, because it's more than just your base pay. So your base pay is typically your hourly or your salary rate. It can be evaluated. The job itself can be evaluated and assigned a value, or you've done market research to determine, or in some cases, you're seeking a specifically qualified individual and you're paying for that knowledge. So you're comparing kind of that career area, if you will. Performance pay, very much less likely to be used, but I would say to be considered because it can be a one-time cost. It can be individual performance pay, group performance pay, or it can be organization-based. And what I mean by that is you can say, if our organization achieves X, you will be entitled to whatever percentage share. It should be pre-structured, it should be clear, but it is an option of a one-time cost that could provide, maybe give you as an organization a leg up in a competitive job market. And then you have your indirect pay. So mandatory benefits, maybe a pension, maybe health and life insurance, pay for time not worked, whether that's vacation days, sick days, employee services. Maybe you have access to an employee assistance program or any other perks, such as company vehicles. Maybe it's a discount on whatever services you provide as a business. Those are all factors of indirect pay. So it's not really what am I paying per hour, it's what is comprising my entire package. Have I looked at it as to its entire value to an employee or a potential employee? Also, I wanted to talk about correction and development, and this is very, very important throughout the life cycle of your employee. How do you support that employee? How do you make sure that your employees' activities are aligned with your business activities? There may be performance issues that come up, but other types of concerns are certainly, inevitably going to happen. So when you encounter behaviors that are beyond performance, it's important that you're prepared to manage those through correction and discipline. So we'll talk a little bit about progressive discipline. So its purpose And it may sound harsh, but it is to stop unacceptable employee behavior, retain that employee as a respected and productive employee, and ensure fair, equal, and justifiable treatment. It's imperative when you are applying discipline that it is progressive, consistent, effective, and fair across your business. And if you have a progressive discipline process in place, this is going to very much support your business in the case of legal challenges. And I know we're getting close to our time, but I do want to say that even the probationary period and thinking that you have, the right to just terminate someone if they're within that probationary period, that reality is going by the wayside. The expectation still in case law is that you have given opportunity for improvement throughout that probationary period. It shouldn't just be a perfunctory period during which you go, yeah, this isn't working out, I'm going to terminate the individual. So these are your progressive discipline steps to keep in mind. It doesn't mean that you have to go 1, 2, 3, 4 in every circumstance. Sometimes the behavior is so abhorrent that you proceed immediately to termination. But these are the considerations to look at as to how do you want to manage the behavior that's occurring with that employee. It can start with that verbal warning. My usual recommendation to written warning is you're at this stage, if the verbal warning hasn't worked, or if even you've had a verbal warning with the individual and they're not really understanding the seriousness of the matter, then you move to written. Suspension can be with or without pay, and again, may be taken immediately and verbally, and then followed by written confirmation. So it's just important to know these different stages of progressive discipline. Important elements throughout: documenting is imperative, keeping notes, dates, times, individuals, anything that's agreed to as an outcome, and always keep in mind that any notes such as this may become part of a legal file in the case of any challenges in the future. Always be ensured that employees are aware of your workplace policies and standards. Again, we go back to that employee handbook. What are your expectations? And how is an employee supposed to know what your expectations are if you haven't told them? Ensuring that you're giving employees notice. So, you've given them an idea that there's an issue, and there's normal supervisory conversations that occur. That's fine. But if you're getting into progressive discipline, then it's becoming more serious, less directional or day-to-day, and it's becoming more formalized. It's important, again, that you're providing an opportunity for that employee to change their behavior. Give them a method of measurement so that everybody knows what is the expected change, when do we expect to see it, and what will demonstrate that we've achieved that change, as well as a time frame for follow-up. So if you're saying, I never want to see this again, obviously, is the ultimate goal, but typically 6 to 8 weeks is a reasonable period of time, obviously depending upon the seriousness or the need for correction. Sometimes you need to demonstrate as an employer that you've provided supports to help the employee achieve that goal. And you don't know what the factors are that are contributing to that behavior until you sit down and have these conversations with employees. So we are at post-employment, which is good because I think we're getting to close to our time to leave time to have some further conversations. So post-employment, the goal is that the employee has had a positive work experience with your business. They are now an ambassador of your business. How do you know that? How do you form your practices on an ongoing basis? The best source that you are going to have, honestly, is your employees. So I encourage you to consider conducting exit interviews. It might seem unlikely because it's so personal in a small business, but if you don't ask, you won't have a basis on which to develop and improve your own practices. So establish a really basic format, invite employees to complete it and submit it back to you, pardon me, upon their resignation or retirement or whatever circumstances they're leaving your business. Probably not in a termination, not the best situation, but up to you whether you include all of that. And then be prepared to review that information and respond. It takes some open-mindedness, I guess, to look at the information that you get back in some cases, but if you ask for it and you get it, then be prepared to act on it. So that is essentially the conclusion of my pre-prepared information today. But what I do want to say is that I firmly believe that we in Northwestern Ontario are in a unique position. Our communities operate differently than in larger centers, and our businesses are the backbone of our communities. They are the reason that we can go wherever is known as downtown in our communities and access the resources that we need on a daily basis. And every community has its own culture. I learned this post-amalgamation, school board amalgamation, when I started visiting further communities than I was accustomed to operating within. And it's really evident if you put your mind to it, how the different communities operate, and just knowing that reality and the culture that you're functioning within will help you create your own processes and to function successfully within those parameters. No matter which stage of employment you're looking at, there's one thing that runs throughout, and that is documentation. Always be prepared to be making notes, remind yourself dates, times, people, conversations, document, document, document. Customers are potential employees, and employees are not only potential customers, but can also create customers for your business. So keep all of those things in mind, and hopefully you have found some information that resonates for you today. So we've covered a lot and just touched briefly on a lot of topics, but I'll certainly do my best to answer any questions that you have. And Sandra, are there any questions in the chat?
Yeah, I have one question. It says, what is the typical probationary period? What is the typical?
Off the top of my head, I would say a typical probation period is 3 months. However, that's really going to be something that you determine as an organization. It has to be reasonable and realistic. So what's the typical life cycle of your employee, right? Do people usually stay for a long time, or is it a very short time? But within that 3-month period, I will say there should be, a notice that this is a probationary period. Let's sit down and talk, at least once every couple of weeks in the first month, maybe once in the second month, and then finalize it in the third month.
I do have a question coming in here. Let's wait for it to come up. Think. You want to unmute your mic and ask the question, please go ahead. So one question is, we don't have an employee handbook. I have been looking at creating one. What all should it include?
If you were looking at an employee handbook, I'm not sure. I'd have to really look at the business itself, I guess, to say what it is. But really, you want expectations. So a general job description of the position that is held, as well as any policies or procedures that govern your day to day. It can be a number of things, but the important thing is that there's some expectations set out. So what are your expectations if someone's going to be absent from work, for example? What's your contact protocol? If you put those kinds of things in writing, there can be no question about what your expectations are. And if you don't have policies and procedures in place, then you at least need to make the job description clear, your expectations of that employee clear, as well as, like I said, expectations for absence and even reasonable levels of absent. Whatever your expectations are should be clearly outlined in that employee handbook.
Okay, and so I also have here, what about making attendance policies? Can we make different exceptions for employees to allow them to come in a different time or others? I was told that it is considered time discrimination, and we must make a standard rule across the board for all employees. Is this true? Board of all employees. Is this true? Okay. Did you get that?
I would say, yeah, I I would say that would be dependent upon the organization and the procedures and policies that are already in place. So if it is written somewhere that all employees will work 9 to 5 with 12 to 1 for lunch, then exceptions to that should be based in some kind of other policy or procedure. It's not that you can't change those, but what you want to make sure is that you're being consistent with all employees. So all employees are aware that there are exceptions to those rules, and this is how you access them. Now, if it's medically based or family reasons based, certainly exceptions that would be covered, for example, under human rights are allowed. But again, it's just so that you're providing consistency for all employees to access those exceptions, and you're not favoring one or two individuals, if that makes sense.
Those were good questions. Anybody else have a question?
If not, I can move on to the next slide to
Okay.
give you some roundtable discussion. So maybe if we take these one at a time. So the first question, and this is just to facilitate some discussion, to share some ideas with the others that are online today. And Sandra, I'm going to have to get you to monitor the chat, but
Okay.
either through the chat or feel free to speak up. The first one is, I have found that the most successful way to recruit staff is. Anyone feel free to speak up or answer in the chat.
We do have somebody typing, so we'll just wait. In person and online for recruiting staff and referrals.
Referrals is a big one, I think, to rely upon. But when you say in person and online, specific platforms that you use for online?
Just a minute. Well, they're answering. Let's see, staff referrals offering monetary bonus in person refers to stays for a certain amount of time. Referred to as stays for a certain amount of time. LinkedIn and hiring apps. So when you said recruit, so that answer was LinkedIn and hiring apps.
Okay, great. So the second
In-person
question
is college, sorry. In-person is college and universities. Yeah.
Yes, an excellent source, definitely. Great, thank you for that input. Is there anything else that you can see coming in for that one, Sandra?
No.
Okay, so we're getting really close to our time. The second question is, besides recruitment, my biggest challenge with employees is, if anyone feels compelled to share, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, someone's typing in right now. Retention. That's their biggest challenge. Oh, missed days and lots of absentees.
Again, that's so retention is, I think, a whole topic in and of itself. But again, if you look back to that intergenerational workforce and try to address some of that, it may help. And like I said, that can be a whole session in and of itself. But also the missed time, etc. Your progressive discipline will help with that. So will your setting out of expectations in a handbook. You can set a standard, you can have an expectation, but you need to communicate that expectation so that when that expectation isn't met, you can say, we've advised you, there's still a problem, you're working through it, give them an opportunity to change that behavior. And if not, then it's not the best fit, obviously. So.
Okay, so one other one was for question number 2, getting qualified applicants. That's their biggest challenge. Also,
Right.
people wanting, okay.
Go ahead.
People wanting more flexibility than we can offer regarding location.
That is certainly a big one, because people are looking for that flexibility, that hybrid type of work. And I assume that if you're saying more than we can offer based on location, you're talking about in-person services, but always make sure that it's not just a position that someone in the organization has taken that says, no, we need to be always face-to-face. There are obvious businesses that need face-to-face. That's a reality. But are there flexible work schedules that can be applied that would open up your job market? So when somebody is applying to your business, maybe they're only going to be available, part-time.
Wasn't expecting today.
Sorry, I've got some feedback. Anyway, is the lack of ability to provide flexibility real or imagined, I guess, is the bottom line. Getting the qualified applicants, there's no doubt that's just a reality of today's labor market, and I don't see that changing in the near future. So you need to put yourself in those spaces where those qualified applicants are as much as possible, whether that means you start looking at it from a mentoring perspective, you're visiting colleges and universities, you're bringing in people who do placements through colleges. That's another excellent avenue. So you just have to be in those spaces on a regular basis to kind of, that's where you create that referral type of reality. I hope that helps.
So what else I have is as a big challenge is creating an environment of camaraderie and cohesiveness with so many work assignments in the HR department.
There is another whole topic of discussion, but part of that I think goes hand in hand with retention is that whole piece around culture and psychological safety. Is there real psychological safety in your organization that employees feel free to flourish in? That is something that you'll find with the workforce, the younger workforce right now, and it's transitioning into the entire workforce that came out of the pandemic partially for the older workers and is inherent to the younger workers, is a lack of tolerance, I guess you can say, for work culture that is not meeting their needs. So if the work culture is negative, you're probably going to have a high turnover. And what you can do in terms of creating that psychological safety is invest and be realistic. It's not words, it is your everyday, day-to-day actions. If you're not walking the talk, then you're not going to have success in that area.
And along with that was mentioned remote worker retention, remote worker accountability without the proper technology.
That's a big one for a lot of individuals. How do you hold your remote workers to account? Well, the bottom line is the job getting done or is the job not getting done? Is there enough work? Are you ensuring that there is enough work to keep that individual engaged 8 hours a day? Again, you can set those expectations. I don't like the keystroke monitoring. We've seen a lot of that happening in larger organizations. In reality, you need to have a remote work policy in place. So who is allowed to work remotely, who is not allowed to work remotely on a general basis, as well as an approval process that the supervisor has approved it, or the individual has applied to work remotely even part of the time and the supervisor has approved it. Then it's the responsibility of the organization, obviously, to keep those remote workers accountable.
And I have one more here. What are your thoughts on headhunting or stealing employees from other businesses?
My first reaction to that is that I recognize that there is a reality that businesses are competing with each other. And I have tried to envision in my mind a way of trying to foster cooperation in that regard, because the reality is, if the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, people are going to go. But if you're actually headhunting and targeting a specific employer to get business from, that's not a practice that I would recommend. My reality is, I'd like to see more cooperation among small businesses in terms of staff sharing. I go into small businesses often and see long-term, super valuable employees that are creating a really great brand for that small business. And I wonder what the success is behind that. part of it is to do with the employer, part of it's to do with the employee. And certainly I understand a small business trying to protect that relationship. But I think there's more room for cooperation than we may be doing right now.
That's all the questions I have. Does anybody else have a question? They can unmic themselves. Okay, just one more here. Cooperation is what? Maybe it's not finished. Just a minute. In what way? Cooperation in what way? Maybe that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Understood. So if someone is, if a business is need, and this is pie in the sky, I recognize that sometimes I can go there. If a business, for example, has a need for an employee every Monday and Wednesday, and that is their only need, is there room to partner with another employer who needs somebody on Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, who they've been really successful with? The individual themselves needs full-time work. You're only able to offer part-time, but you may know another business who is willing to pick up the rest of those hours, thus offering someone full-time. Can you cooperate in that means? And I know that sounds pie in the sky, but that's one of the ways that I envision some kind of flexible cooperation.
Anybody else have a question?
I can move to the next slide. I know
Okay,
we're at
that'd be great.
11:04, so we're a little bit
Yep.
over our time, but I
Yep.
do want to
We're
say to
good. We're still
everyone,
good.
all right. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I want to thank Pace and Sandra for the platform today. I want to thank all of you for your time and joining me here today. So this is my contact information, and I do want to make a note that I do offer 30-minute free consultations. There is a website with a contact form that will be available soon. And through that website as well, I'll be building more social media connections, which I'll link on the website. And that'll be coming within the next week or two is my hope. We're almost there, but we're still working on it. So thank you again, everyone.
Okay, well, thank you, Jocelyn. And I guess this ends our webinar. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank all our guests for coming. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to hang out, Sandra, until everyone has logged
Okay.
off, just in case anybody has any other questions.
Yep. Got a lot of thank yous coming in.